Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
Throughout human history, the stories of lost civilizations and forgotten peoples have sparked the imagination of scholars, theologians, and truth-seekers alike. Few narratives have endured and fascinated as much as the mystery surrounding the lost tribes of Israel. Among these, one particular theory has garnered growing attention over the centuries, that the descendants of the lost tribes, specifically the so-called Black Hebrews, have roots in Africa and other parts of the ancient world far beyond the narrow borders of the Levant. This idea is more than a romantic notion. It is a rich and complex historical proposition supported by archaeological traces, linguistic connections, ancient records, cultural practices, and oral traditions that stretch across continents and millennia. It is a story deeply intertwined with questions of identity, exile, faith, and legacy. This article ventures deep into the tangled terrain of history to unearth the possible connections between the Black Hebrews and the ancient Israelites, examining evidence that points toward the dispersal of Israelite peoples into the African continent, their settlement and integration into indigenous communities, and their survival through persecution and migration. It is a tale that defies conventional academic boundaries, touching on biblical history, African traditions, Semitic languages, colonial archives, and even DNA studies. The journey is not only a search for historical facts but a spiritual exploration into how the story of a scattered people became buried beneath centuries of silence, and how new generations are lifting the veil to rediscover a shared past. The Hebrew Bible speaks of a divided kingdom, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. After the Assyrian conquest in the 8th century BCE, the 10 northern tribes of Israel were exiled and seemingly disappeared from the pages of recorded history. Their fate became one of the great unsolved enigmas of the ancient world. While mainstream historians assumed assimilation into Assyrian culture or loss of ethnic identity, others believe that many Israelites fled southward, beyond the Nile, into the heart of Africa. Here they retained not only their identity but fragments of their language, traditions, and religious memory. This hypothesis gains momentum when examining the oral histories of African tribes that claim Hebrew ancestry, as well as biblical parallels in rituals, symbols, and laws that echo unmistakably in African customs. Among the most compelling examples of such cultural continuity are found among the Igbo of Nigeria. The Igbo people have long maintained a tradition that they are descendants of ancient Israelites. This claim is not solely based on belief. It is rooted in a complex tapestry of cultural practices such as circumcision on the 8th day, dietary laws reminiscent of kosher restrictions, the celebration of new moons, and an emphasis on monotheism. European missionaries and colonial administrators in the 19th century, upon encountering the Igbo, were astounded by these Jewish-like customs, often remarking on their resemblance to Old Testament prescriptions. Even earlier, accounts from Arab and Jewish travelers documented the presence of communities practicing distinctly Hebraic customs in regions such as Mali, Ghana, and Sudan. These communities were often marginalized and hidden, preserving their identity through secrecy and internal discipline. The Lemba people of southern Africa, for example, represent another vital piece of this historical puzzle. Though located in Zimbabwe and South Africa, the Lemba have long upheld a tradition that they descended from Jews who migrated from Judea via Yemen and into Africa. Recent genetic studies have added an astonishing layer of credibility to their oral tradition. Many Lemba males were found to carry the Cohen modal haplotype, a genetic marker associated with the priestly line of Aaron, brother of Moses. This finding not only gives scientific weight to their ancestral claims, but also invites a broader reconsideration of African involvement in biblical history. Another historical cornerstone is the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful African empire centered in present-day Sudan. Kush played a significant role in biblical narratives, and there are ample references to Kushites in the Hebrew Bible. Some interpretations suggest that during the period of Israelite exile, many fled south through Egypt into Kushite territory, where they may have intermingled with local populations or established communities of their own. Ancient Ethiopian texts and Jewish traditions in Ethiopia also speak of such migrations. The Beta Israel or Ethiopian Jews are perhaps the most well-documented of these communities. Their existence, rooted in the Talmudic and medieval periods, was recognized even by modern Israel, which granted them right of return under the law of return in the late 20th century. However, the movement of Black Hebrews is not confined to Africa alone. Ancient inscriptions, such as those found in Elephantine, Egypt, reveal that Jewish communities existed in Egypt centuries before the Common Era. These communities had their own temple, priesthood, and legal system, suggesting a continuity of Hebrew life outside of traditional Israel. This raises the question, if such communities existed in one corner of Africa, could there not be others scattered more widely? Historical records from Islamic and early Christian periods speak of Jewish traders, scholars, and pilgrims moving along trans-Saharan trade routes, spreading not only goods but also faith. Their descendants, whether assimilated or self-segregated, could have formed the backbone of many African tribes who later retained a sense of otherness, one that matched the biblical description of a chosen people in exile. European colonial powers, unaware or dismissive of this nuanced heritage, often erased or ignored these legacies in their imperial narratives. What complicates the history further is the role played by slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. Many scholars have raised the possibility that a significant portion of enslaved Africans brought to the Americas were not just Africans in the general sense, but descendants of the Israelite diaspora who had settled in West Africa centuries earlier. Names of ports like Judah or Wida, in present-day Benin, raise eyebrows when viewed through this lens. While correlation does not equal causation, the symbolic echo of Israelite names in West African geography is a mystery that refuses to fade. Indeed, many of the slaves taken to the New World carried with them cultural traits and beliefs strikingly similar to Hebraic customs. This continuity of religious practices such as Sabbath observance, ritual purity, avoidance of pork, and ceremonial rites manifested in new forms under the pressure of enslavement and conversion. In the American South, some African American Christian communities would eventually reinterpret their own suffering through the lens of the Exodus narrative, identifying with the Israelites and claiming spiritual descent from them. This was not mere metaphor. It was the echo of a deep ancestral memory. Across Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America, the emergence of Hebrew Israelite movements during the 19th and 20th centuries was a direct response to this intuitive reclaiming of identity. Whether among African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, or Afro-Brazilians, the idea that the children of Israel were people of color resonated powerfully. These communities found in the Hebrew scriptures a language of empowerment, resistance, and self-recognition that had been denied them through centuries of dehumanization. Today, the topic of Black Hebrews remains controversial and polarizing in academic circles. Some scholars regard it with skepticism, citing a lack of definitive archaeological evidence or accusing proponents of historical revisionism. Others argue that traditional academic frameworks are ill-equipped to recognize oral history, scattered genetic markers, and non-Western sources of knowledge as valid historical evidence. Yet, with growing interest in African contributions to biblical history, the tides are slowly turning. More interdisciplinary research is being conducted, and the voices of previously marginalized communities are finding new platforms to share their truth. Ultimately, the story of the lost tribe of Israel and the evidence of Black Hebrews in ancient history is a multifaceted, transcontinental, and deeply spiritual one. It is a story that challenges Eurocentric narratives and demands that we reevaluate our assumptions about identity, heritage, and the movement of peoples across ancient landscapes. It tells us that history is not static, but living, that its echoes survive in languages, rituals, and bloodlines even after empires fall and names change. In an age of rediscovery, where DNA tests and digitized archives are bridging oceans of silence, we are perhaps closer than ever to unveiling the fuller picture. The Black Hebrews, once erased or ignored, are reclaiming their place in the grand narrative of history. Not as myth or metaphor, but as a people whose story still lives in the deserts of Africa, in the hills of the Americas, and in the hearts of those who never forgot who they were.